Relationships are such a big part of our lives every single day. And some of them can have conflict, but can we really have an open mind and come from a place of curiosity? We're living in a world where everyone thinks it's black and white, your side versus my side, and it's not that way. We can still be curious and understand. We don't have to necessarily agree, but we can still try to understand, and maybe we'll learn something in the process.
Welcome to Jagged Edge Podcast with Yogi Patel, where we're diving into challenges and solutions that impact our personal and professional lives. And today we're exploring a topic that's incredibly relevant to today's world of constant distractions, competing demands, constantly on the go. And we're joined by an expert, Cheryl. She practices mindfulness. Organizational productivity is something she can talk to us about. And we're together going to look at some strategies and habits that can help us prioritize better, remain mindfulness, and in turn, balance our productivity and solve various conflicts with ease. Cheryl, thank you for being here on Jagged Edge Podcast. And this is a leadership podcast for many of us who are caregivers and working in high demanding jobs. Tell us a bit about yourself and how did you get into this business? I know you personally, and I remember when you were working in finance in a high-powered position.
Yeah, thank you, Yogi. Thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm very excited to be here. Yeah, so like you said, I worked in corporate finance for about 28 years, also raising two daughters and managing a household and trying to balance it all, which is actually a myth. I'm not sure we can find balance with everything going on. And so I struggled a lot with overwhelm and burnout, just working long hours as well. And I started practicing mindfulness, which is really just self-awareness, just understanding my own patterns in my day-to-day activities and what I'm spending my resources on, right? Our attention, our time, and our money. And then along with that came self-compassion as well. So that really helped. That was a game changer for me to accept the difficult emotions that were present and then finding that fierce compassion of action to kind of get me to go so I wasn't always procrastinating as well.
Beautiful to hear how you've made this incredible shift. I can just see how you're glowing and sort of illuminating and just being your true self. Tell us a little bit about the strategies that you find most effective in helping individuals and teams prioritize their tasks to improve productivity.
Yeah, so I think it's really important, whether it's an organization or your personal life. I think we're all leaders in one form or another, right? To really know what our values are and our core values. And I think of core values as that compass in our life that guides us, right? And so for me, compassion is a core value. My health is a core value, right? Making impact in the world is a core value of mine. And so once we know that, most organizations have a strategic plan. Right? They have this overarching, what's our plan for the year, the next 5 years? And from that, you have goals. And from those goals, you have the tasks. Like, you break it down so it's not so overwhelming. And so when we know that, it's easier to prioritize. But the issue that we have, and you already said it, is we all have these competing priorities, right? And then we are so distracted. Right? We are always under pressure. We're always on. And there is so much information out there. We just don't know what to do. And we get distracted and we have busyness actually in our minds, right? We're constantly ruminating and getting overwhelmed. What I've found is that if we can just slow down, it can actually help us speed up. And I think that is really the key to just stopping and recalling what are our core values and our goals. And that's our priorities, right? Those are our priorities at that point. what happens is many times we go into what's called action addiction or go into doing mode, where we just start working, right? Because we're so restless, we're so impatient, and our minds are like, oh my God, I have 500 things on my to-do list and I need to start doing, as opposed to just slowing down for a moment.
Tell me, I'm intrigued by slowing down to speed up. What does that mean and how do we do that?
What is really helpful is, really planning. I like the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, right? Of 20% of the effort for 80% of the outcome. I use this matrix, it's all actually derived from Dr. Diana Hill, who's a psychologist, and she uses a wise effort matrix. And what she does is you have your core values on the horizontal axes, and you first start with the self-awareness of your patterns of how am I spending my time, right? There's the burnout and not worth it. And if we start to realize that, oh, maybe I'm multitasking too much, or I'm getting into a, email rabbit hole or something, we start to understand our patterns and we see, okay, is this serving my values? Is this serving my goals, right? That I need to do. And then we start to move more toward the right side of this matrix of, savoring, or is it worth it? Is what I'm working on really benefiting the end goal here? And so when I say to slow down, it's almost as if maybe in the beginning of the day, we take a few breaths, right? Mm-hmm. We get still. We start understanding the busyness in our mind and the anxiety in our body. And we just maybe for 5 minutes do some deep breathing or check in with the body, because our bodies are always in the present moment. Our minds are usually in the past or the future. So if we can get still in the present, then we can say, okay, what do I need to focus on right now? Let me get some clarity, right? And then maybe in the morning, we don't just jump into the emails, right? Or we don't jump into something that really isn't that important and that doesn't need to be done right now. And we do some deep work in the morning, critical thinking in the morning. Does that make sense?
So much sense, because first thing in the morning, as we know, the brain is at this optimal state and it's able to even allow us to form different habits. And this is the best time where, culturally for many, morning times are used for that moment of spirituality, whatever that might look like for individuals, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yoga meditation doesn't have to be the only way that you get there, but it could be through small walks and just being aware of yourself and just having those moments. I appreciate what you said about there is no balance. We all chase this thing about balance. Tell me a bit more about what you are referring to. Like, we all want this life, work, everything balanced, but there is no such thing.
Right. Absolutely. I do think it's a myth. I think our lives are seasonal, right? Just like our work, right? It's different times. So I remember when I started working at a startup, and anyone that's worked at a startup in the finance world, it's crazy. I mean, the hours I worked, it was like 14-hour days, and my daughters were in middle school. So they, had a lot of activity. But at that point in my life, I really wanted this position, this career goal to work. So I focused on that. That was my priority. I mean, I still tended to the family, but my husband had to just do a little more, right? And so that worked out. And I made things like automation and efficiencies a priority here. So then after about a year, I was able to actually automate everything, slides and presentations I had to do, where then it kind of creeped into where my family took priority. And I was able to leave work at 4:00 to do that. So I do think that our priorities shift, and, balance isn't always there, but we still can get those small moments of focus. Like you said, mindfulness is just self-awareness. So if that means I would just sneak a coffee break with a coworker in the middle of the day, right? Or just step outside because I was starting to get frustrated in my meetings and take a few breaths, right? Or just kind of look outside and feel nature out. Those are small snippets we can get. I think our priorities are constantly changing, and that's okay.
Yes. One of the things that you mentioned is that taking that time for that coffee break, when we're in that busy mode and want to bring value, those are the things that we avoid the most, that 5, 10, 15 minutes, because we think we're on this time crunch. And I appreciate what you just shared about taking that time. It's like me time, us time, that actually will add now more time. So I definitely now understand the whole picture. So how would teams review their goals and ensure? So we're talking about a company where we all have goals and priorities. And how could we be more effective creating tasks themselves? So in your case, you created some slides and kind of balanced whatever was going on in your family, raising your 2 children. Many companies, we have constantly shifting goals and we're chasing them. So where is that step one to just sort of say, okay, I'm being pulled and I'm going to pause, and where do I go from here?
That's a great question. And this has happened often when I was in corporate, and even now running my own business, it's happened. And I think the key in an organization is communication, really open communication. And so, like I said, you have the leaders at the top, right? You have the C-suite, you have VPs, and they make this strategic plan, and it trickles down. And I think it's important for in your department, let's just take it to the micro level. In your department, it's important for your manager to really communicate from the core values to the strategic plan to the goals and now to tasks. Right. And when there's competing priorities, which there always are, right? Because we have fire drills sometimes too. I think it's important for the employee, for the individual contributor or manager to actually ask, okay, I have A and I have B. What's most important right now? Like, what do I need to do? And I think it is the job of both people to really communicate and sit down and think it through. It's a dialogue. From what I know is sometimes we don't feel like we have enough time, and managers sometimes will just be like, just figure it out. It's all a priority. That's not realistic. That's when burnout starts to happen because we're trying to do too much and we don't know if we're working on the right things, and we slowly get burnt out. I was at a networking event and I think a CTO actually said that. She's like, sometimes my people don't even ask me, like, is this important right now? I'm working on this for this priority. And she's like, if people would just be more transparent about, how they feel, then I can give them more guidance. So I do think it goes both ways.
Yes, and often we get into this hierarchy position as an employee and leader and think that we have to manage the task. I appreciate what the CTO mentioned and what you're sharing. Just being able to say, hey, I have these 5 things on my task and I know this is a priority. However, I'm going to do this, and that. I think everyone would be, but that fear gets in on how we're going to show up. Right? We're all constantly worried about perception of others, of us. And kind of sort of the perception is when you fail and when you can't get this work done is equally bad. So what would we choose? Perhaps we would choose our dignity or self-care, hopefully.
It's also important that leaders have a psychologically safe environment for their people to ask the question. Because to your point, sometimes people don't feel comfortable asking the question because they've been shut down and they have been told, just figure it out. Like it's all a priority. And, they don't feel safe. And so I do think it's the leaders of an organization to foster the psychological safety, right? Which is really to be kind and present and direct as well, right? Direct and clear. So everyone understands what they need to do.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense to me because it's and both. So it works on both sides being as transparent in that communication piece. Lovely, lovely point. Now we all know, right? We're attached to our cell phones. We have the computer. We have the ding, ding watches going on. So in this world of constant distractions and information overload, how do we manage these distractions? Because I know that my heart races sometimes, that anxiety pops in when you're doing something or you're speaking to someone, and that stress level goes up for me because I know all these other things that are happening and it takes my focus away. and then my priority and my mind changes. So how would we balance this overwhelming world of technology and finding that balance?
So, Yogi, you sound like you have a lot of self-awareness of knowing when you feel a high amount of stress, right? You talked about what's happening in your body. And I think that is really the first step, is to just acknowledge, oh, wow, I'm kind of stressed right now. So many people don't understand when they're stressed because they're just doing. Again, that action, as opposed to just pausing for 3 breaths. It takes no time at all. And even saying to yourself, oh, I'm really stressed right now, right? And understanding even your thought patterns of ruminating. And I think once that happens and your patterns, being curious to it, right? And having some kindness towards yourself. Okay, I'm getting a Slack Teams coming. I'm getting an email. My phone is dinging. Maybe I need to turn off my notifications so I can focus on this right now. And many times we need to communicate that. Again, it's about communication. We need to communicate this to our managers, to our teams. Like, hey, I'm working on a really important project right now. I need to really focus. So I'm going to put my teams on do not disturb. I'm going to turn my email notifications off. If there's an emergency, please come by. Or, there's a way to get a hold of me. And I think that's really important. And that's self-compassion right there, to know what's happening for you and taking that action of, okay, right now, this is what I'm focusing on because I'm starting to get stressed, because everything's starting to come at me at one time.
What you're speaking about even would just had a thought that if we had this as a company norm, when we have meetings, we're going to focus and we're going to have our cell phones turned off. So when someone's looking for someone and the phones are turned off, it's an automatic assumption that they're really busy, and having that faith and trust in the psychological safety piece. So I think it doesn't have to be just individual. It could be a whole team that practices self-care and compassion and show up for one another. You lead mindful practice and you also teach this. Can you tell us what that might look like?
When the